Okay, hello everybody. Today, what we are going to do is pretty cool. Uh, we are going to be using uh, R Radius and Duo Mobile to provide multi-factor authentication to our uh, pfSense installation, which is our firewall. Uh, It doesn't have to be pfSense. There's lots of commercial grade firewalls that offer radius authentication, such as WatchGuard will do, for example. But pretty much anything that you can use radius authentication to log in, you can use this for. This specific guide is going to be for pfSense. I don't have WatchGuard or anything else, so I wouldn't know how to configure those. Okay, but this is going to be for pfSense. All right, so in order to use this, let me just get my internal knowledge base pulled up here. Okay, so in order to do this, there's a couple of things. First of all, this guide is going to assume, okay, that you have an installation of pfSense, obviously. Further, you're going to need an account created with Duo Security. I won't be showing you how to do that. And third, you're going to have set up and configured some form of a Radius authentication server. There's all kinds of different models of this. There's free Radius, open Radius. You can install a Radius server on your pfSense. In this specific instance, I will be using uh, Windows server with a network policy server because I use Active Directory here in my home environment. All that matters is you need to be able to support a class attribute. Okay, so in order to assign our Radius authenticated user permissions within pfSense to actually do stuff, we're going to need to use a class attribute. So as long as your Radius server can pass or send class attributes when it authenticates a user, we're going to be fine. Okay? So in my specific instance, I have three separate machines. Okay, so I have one which is my pfSense, that's my firewall. I have a second server that is running the authentication proxy, and I have a third server that is running the network policy server. Okay, so that's the Radius server. So I have three separate machines. You can do it with two. You can run the authentication proxy and the Radius server on the same physical machine or virtual machine, as it were. You are going to have to change some port numbers around, so that isn't really terribly difficult to do or figure out. Okay, so first thing we're going to have to do is we are going to have to go over to uh, admin.duosecurity.com and configure a new Radius application. Okay, so allow me to show you this here. All right, so let's switch sources here. So here I am on the Duo Authentication Proxy. This is their knowledge base article. You can install this on either Windows or Linux. And you can actually, I'm calling it the Radius Authentication Proxy, but that's not what it is because it also supports LDAP. Best performance is going to be uh, Radius and using Linux, but that's for like really high perform. I almost guarantee you won't have an issue. Um, so basically, the authentication proxy is a uh, secondary authentication service. So the way this is going to work is that you are going to attempt to authenticate against your firewall, in this case pfSense, using Radius authentication. The firewall will then reach out to the Duo Authentication Proxy service that service will then reach out, will then take those credentials and send those to your actual Radius server, which will then authenticate and pass through the class attribute that we're going to need back to the proxy. The proxy will then reach out to Duo and authenticate using your Duo configured Duo, what have you, YubiKey or your phone or what have you. And then assuming that succeeds, it will then it will then authenticate to the firewall. Okay, so it's a proxy service. It sits in the middle and it performs the secondary authentication. Okay, there are two ways to configure it. The first one is that it is required. So, for example, if your internet connection goes down and you cannot authenticate to the proxy, to Duo using the proxy, it is going to just not let you through, period. That's called safe mode, and that's called secure mode. And then there's a safe mode where if it cannot reach the Duo service, it will let you through, which is probably a good thing to configure on your firewall, because if you don't have internet and you can't get into your firewall to fix the internet, then that's obviously not going to work out very well. Now, you don't have to do it that way. You can set it up in secure mode, and then anytime you don't have internet access, you will just have to use like local accounts in pfSense to authenticate, and you'll just have to have like really, really good passwords on them. But that's up to you. Okay. All right. So the first thing, let me. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we are going to need to go to. I'm going to be blurring out a lot of the. If you're not familiar with Duo, get familiar with Duo, because pretty much everything in the Duo security panel needs to be blurred out. Like, it's just, so I'm going to be pretty much blurring everything. But the first thing you'll want to do is you'll want to come over to Applications, and you can see I already have several applications set up, Bitwarden and various things. So we're going to go into my Radius here, and this is going to have several pieces of information. It's going to have an integration key. It's going to have a secret key. It's going to have an API host name. I'm blurring all this. I'll need to blur all this. Now, as you know, in Duo, there are several types of policies we can configure. In this one, I'm allowing new users who are unenrolled in the proxy to pass through. You do not have to do that. That's a global policy. And then there's specific application policies. So this is up to you. So you can use this so that perhaps administrative users with admin access to the firewall are required, or administrative accounts, I should say, with administrative access that are allowed access will need to use Duo to authenticate. But anyone who is not using Duo, who doesn't have admin access, doesn't need to use Duo. That's up to you. Okay, so we have our integration key, our secret key, our API host name. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we are going to need to download and install the actual service here. And this is going to be kind of a long video, and I apologize for that. I'm an IT guy. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not pithy, so deal with it. But you'll need to download and install the service. If you're on the knowledge base page here, which you can get to by Googling Duo Authentication Proxy reference, you'll just down here in this Windows section or Linux, whichever you prefer, you'll click and you can download the current release. As I said, I'll be using Windows because that's my preferred method. Okay, now that we have that downloaded, you will want to get it installed on your server. I won't be covering the installation on the server here because I hope you are able to install software on a server. It's really simple. You don't have to next or anything. Like you literally, it's just a next through it because there's two parts. There's the service, which uses a configuration file to grab the information. On Linux, all you're doing is installing the service, and then you write the configuration file in the correct spot, and you're done. On Windows, what you're actually installing is a package, which is the service and an IDE. So it has a pretty slick IDE, which contains like the necessary like verbiage and syntax and things like that. It's pretty cool, which is another reason why I recommend Windows. Okay, so let's fast forward. You have installed the service, the application, and you're on Windows, and we're good to go. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, I am going to let me to delete all of that secret information that we don't want you to see. Okay, and let me grab my where is it? There it is. I better just make sure. Okay. All right. So we've got this guy set up. All right. So allow me to bring this over, and it'll resize. All right. So this is the authentication proxy right here. Okay. And this is the IDE that I'm talking about. So if we go back to the, let me minimize that. If we go back here to the authentication reference, there are, here in the configuration section, there's a couple things we can do. First is encrypting passwords. So what you can do is you can actually store the passwords, like your integration key and your secret key and your radius secret and all that, in a secured location that are encrypted, and then you pass those. You don't actually put the plain text like integration and key and things like that in your configuration file. You would put like a obfuscated thing, and then it would pull it. I'm not setting that up because mine is on an encrypted server. Obviously, if you're not using an encrypted server, you're going to want to set that up. You'll recall that section. Okay, so there are two sections to the authentication proxy. Okay, the first section is the client section, and that is specific to the client device, like your radius client, and then the main section, and then there's a server section. Okay, so in our main section, there's several things which we're going to need. These up here are optional. These are like global options. So if you wanted to do debug logging, you would do like debug equals true. That's going to be really useful at first for when you're figuring out getting this thing actually working. You can log authentication events and pass it through to a SIM. You can log SSO events, log size of files, and all this cool stuff. I'm not concerned with any of that right now. You can configure those as needed for your environment. Now, the ones we're actually concerned about are the client sections, okay? So there are several different types of clients. There's an AD client, which is LDAP, and then there's Radius client, which is Radius. Okay. So we're not concerned with AD client, so we're going to skip that. Oh, and then there's a Duo only client. So the Duo only option is where you don't use like Radius at all. You just authenticate against Duo with the push notification, and you don't worry about the secondary or the primary Radius server at all. Okay. Uh, so so that's what's all right. So let's jump into it. Okay, let's jump right into the configuration. The first thing we are going to want to do is first we configure our Radius client. Okay, so this is why Windows is cool because it has the IDE. So we're going to do Radius clients. Okay, next line. We're going to input our host. This is going to be the Radius server that we'll be authenticating against. In my case, it's 10.0.1.2.4.2. Then we're going to do secret. And this is going to be our Radius shared secret key. Okay, in my case, I'm going to hit semicolon, which comments it out, and then do shared secret. Okay. And finally, we're doing port, and this is going to be the port that we need to authenticate. This is going to be the port we're using to authenticate, which is 1812. Excuse me while I take a drink here. Okay. So that is our Radius client configuration. That's pretty simple. So next, we have several pieces of, we have several different possible Radius configurations we can use. Okay, so let me just put this here. All right. So first is there's Radius Auto. There's Radius iframe, Radius challenge, Radius concat, Radius duo only. Okay, so Radius duo only is something that doesn't have primary authentication. So remember, primary authentication is your duo, is your Radius server, and then secondary authentication is the duo service. Okay, so if you have something that doesn't accept primary authentication, you would use Radius duo only. Then radio concat. Basically, this allows you to concatenate like a password and like a PIN number or something, and put those together and use those as the password. It's a way. So this will basically allow you to use like a duo like 6-digit passcode and append that to the end of the password, rather than getting a push notification. And each one of these will kind of tell you what it does and walk you through how to use it. Then there's challenge. That would be like a contextual text challenge that they would have to enter. And then there's iframe, which is a web-based authentication prompt. iframe is an HTTP thing. But we are using Radius Auto for the push notification, for the auto push notification. Okay. So let's get this out of the way. And there are several pieces of information we're going to need. So first thing we're going to do is bracket Radius server auto. That's 1. And then below that, we're going to be doing ikey is equal to, so you're going to go over to your Duo admin panel, grab your Radius application, and you're going to copy your integration key. I won't be doing that. I will not be doing that because I don't feel like blurring this out. And then below that, we're going to be doing, S key is equal to, oh, my bad. Gotta have to select it. Okay. Below that, S key equals, that's going to be your secret key. Okay. And again, you're just copying and pasting the secret key and the integration key. Below that, we're doing API underscore host. And then that is going to be your API host name. All right. Now, there are other options. So as we see here, there are other options. So we can do radius IP1. So if you had like multiple radius servers, for example, you could do that. So this is going to be, and then finally, the last thing we want is, this is the last required thing. Well, it's not the last required thing. We're going to want client. I need to spell it right. We want client. And this is going to be radius underscore client because we've configured a radius client up here, so we're going to use radius client here. You can configure in the client section, you can configure multiple clients. We're also going to want, well, okay. So just below API hostname here, we're going to want radius IP1. Now, this is not our radius client, as in the primary authentication method. This is going to be, so this is not the radius server. Remember, this is a three-way handshake here. So the authentication proxy is a client of the primary server, but it's an authentication server for the firewall client, right? So in this section, we're going to be configuring the IP address and the shared secret with the firewall, the pfSense firewall in this case, all right? So I'm putting in my firewall IP of 10.0.1.1, and then below that, I'm doing radius underscore secret 1, and that's going to be my shared secret. And then below that, we configure our fail mode. Now, you do not have to configure, so the default for fail mode is actually safe. The default fail mode is actually safe. So in safe fail mode, in the event the Duo servers cannot be contacted, say if your internet's down, then you will bypass Duo. You do not actually have to put this in. I, however, choose to do so, and I am doing safe, which is the default. Okay. Below that, we have radius client. It's important. Below that, we're going to be defining our port number. And in my case, even though this isn't technically necessary, I've chosen to use different ports. So I actually use 18.120 just so it's easier in my mind to keep track of what's going on. We're going to do, now, personally, I think this is really silly, but we have to specify allow concatenation equals false, okay? So what allow concat will do is it will do the check for the delimiter and an appended duo factor or passcode. But you have to which we're not using, so we set it as false. Also, if you're using MS Chat v2 on your primary server, say a Windows authentication server, you have to set it as false. Okay? And then there's an API timeout function, which is the maximum amount of time that the proxy service will wait for a response from the Duo side before it fails. Okay? And then debug is equal to true. You're going to want to configure your debug at first until you get it working. It logs to a text file, which I find a little silly. I would prefer it to log to the like Windows Event Viewer, but it actually logs to a text file, which gets really big. So that's fun. And finally, this is a really important one. Pass through all, and this is going to be equal to true. Okay? What this is going to do is this is going to pass through all of our attributes. So any attributes that the primary authentication server sends to the proxy are going to get sent to the pfSense firewall, the client. Okay? So once you've done that, you're going to hit, there's two options here. There's validate and there's save. There is no way to validate anything with Radius. So if you're using LDAP, you can validate and it'll test, and it's good. But if you're using Radius, it doesn't do any of that. It'll basically just say, yeah, the config looks good, and good luck. So just hit save, and you're done. I'm obviously not going to hit save because this is not my real config file. And then up here, you're going to, after you save it, you're going to start the service, and assuming everything goes well, it will run. Okay, so I'm actually going to close out of that. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come here into services. You'll want to come into services, and you'll want to find your Duo security authentication proxy service and make sure that's running and set the startup type to automatic. Okay. So now that we've done that, we are done with the proxy server, hopefully. Oh, actually, one last thing. If you did want to find the log file, you will find it this PC, C drive, program files, Duo security authentication proxy, and then you see here there's log, and then we have authentication proxy.log. That's the one we're going to be using. So this is what we'll use to troubleshoot if anything is not going well. Okay. Okay, welcome back everyone. So now that we have installed the Duo Authentication Proxy service onto our server, the next thing we want to do is we want to configure our client, our two clients. So this is going to be our pfSense and our actual Radius server. Okay. So I would recommend to simplify any troubleshooting you're going to have, I highly recommend that you set up pfSense and the actual Radius server and get those working together first before you try to add in the authentication proxy. Okay? So I am gonna kind of go through, give a quick overview of how to set up pfSense to work with Network Policy Server for you. uh, in this tutorial. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to add our pfSense firewall as a Radius client and put your shared secret and all that. Okay. Once you've done that, go ahead and configure your Duo Auth Proxy as a client as well, just so we don't have to come back to this page. Then we're going to come down to connection request policies, and we're going to ensure that actually we don't need to be in connection request policies, so don't worry about that at all. What we want to be in is network policies. Okay. So we have several network policies we're going to want here. We want pfSense admin login. This is one of them. Okay, so we're gonna give it a descriptive name. In my case, it's pfSense admin login, but it can be whatever you want. So this is going to be our network policy, which allows us to authenticate against Windows Active Directory. Under conditions, users group, Windows groups, we're going to want to add the group of users which have admin rights to pfSense. And this is their group name, pfSense admin. You can make it whatever you want, of course. Under constraints, we're using secured password and secured password EAP. If you're outside of a lab environment, you'll want to get like a certificate like TLS working. Idle timeout, nothing. Session timeout, nothing. Day and time, nothing. And then NAS port type is going to be nothing. And then under settings, this is important. Class. Under settings, we want the class. So you'll want to add class, add, and then pfSense admin. That's what you'll want to add is pfSense admin. Click OK. Close. Okay. All right. Now, it doesn't have to be pfSense admin. Okay? It's just the name of the group within pfSense that has administrative rights or status rights or view only or read only or whatever. So that's once you've got that set up, you should be okay on the pfSense side, on the network policy server side. Okay, so let me get this over here, and then boop. Okay, so now we're inside of pfSense, and we have a couple things we need to do. So the first thing we need to do inside of pfSense is we need to go to System and then User Manager, and we need to come here to Groups. Okay, so as you can see, I've added a couple of groups. The first one is pfSense admin, and the second one is pfSense status. Okay, so recall in here, pfSense admin, properties, settings, this class attribute of pfSense admin, this needs to match exactly to whatever the group name is here. pfSense admin. It needs to match exactly, okay? So here in pfSense admin, you want to add the users who are a member of the group and their permissions. And then over here on authentication servers, you can see I have Active Directory. This is my actual network policy server, and then I have the Duo Auth Proxy. So you'll want to add new, radius, descriptive name, whatever, and then protocol you're using, IP address, shared secret, services, ports, and once you get it, you'll want to get it working to the network policy server first. And I obviously skipped past that a little bit, but I hope you're familiar with how to set up a Radius server. I hope you're familiar with getting a Radius client-server relationship working. Okay. Now, if you do not have that class attribute of pfSense admin that matches the group name, you will be able to authenticate and log into pfSense, but you won't actually have permission to do anything. Okay? So it's important that you remember that. Now, you'll want to set up another one that's the Duo Authentication Proxy, and shared secret and all that. And again, I changed the port number on the proxy to 18120 rather than 1812 like normal, just to make things a little bit easier. You don't have to do that. Okay, so once you have those two things set up, you'll want to come over here to Diagnostics, find the Duo Auth Proxy, and then, yep, autofill it. Here's the username and password. Let's have it send me a test. Okay, it sent me a thing. I'm gonna approve it. And okay, so I approved the message and I authenticated successfully. And this user is a member of groups pfSense admin. So it's important that it actually says pfSense admin there. If it doesn't, then when you log in, nothing will you won't be able to do anything. You'll just get a red screen and it'll be like, you goofed. Figure it out. So then after we have done that, we want to go into User Manager. We want to go into Settings, and then for Authentication Server, we want to set Duo Authentication Proxy. Okay, and then just hit Save, and we're good to go. So once you do that, assuming you've done everything correctly, okay, we can autofill our name, and then when we hit enter, it's going to sign in. We're going to get the push notification right there, and I'm signed in. Okay, and we're good to go. Now, the nice thing about this is we can reuse this for our remote access VPN. So if you want to have a remote access VPN set up in pfSense, and I've only validated this with OpenVPN because I don't use WireGuard, but if you have a remote access VPN set up, you can simply go over to OpenVPN and edit, and then just set your remote access server or backend for authentication to be remote access radius, and then Duo Auth Proxy. So you can actually just recycle this configuration for a VPN, which is nice. It's nice killing two birds with one stone. Okay, so I kind of moved quickly through that. There was a lot to get through, and I didn't want the video to take an hour. Also, I'm assuming that people who are watching this are a little more advanced users. If you are familiar, if you're trying to use a radius, if you're trying to use like if you have a Duo and you have like pfSense firewall and you use like radius authentication and you're trying to set up a proxy, I assume you're familiar with several of those things I mentioned, and you're familiar with documentation to the point where you can kind of figure things out as you need to. But I had a lot of trouble getting the class attribute of like pfSense admin, so I had admin permissions, or any permissions at all for that matter, in the inside pfSense. So that was the main point, is getting it working so you have actual permissions in pfSense. As far as I could tell, there was no like guides or anything I could find online about how to do that. And I kind of had to figure it out. It wasn't terribly difficult. It wasn't terribly difficult to figure out, but I just kind of wanted to put this together for anyone who has more trouble than I did. Okay. So hopefully that wasn't too difficult to follow. And as I said, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm a friendly neighborhood IT guy. So good luck.